The Missouri House Ethics Committee officially ended its investigation of House Speaker Dean Plocher as the committee chairman revealed new allegations of a culture of, quote, retaliation, intimidation, and obstruction, end quote.
Missouri Capitol Bureau Chief Joe McLean has the latest tonight from Jefferson City.
Today, a bipartisan majority of the committee found that there was absolutely no merit in the accusations.
Speaker Dean Plocher taking a victory lap after an ethics complaint against him was dismissed after months.
The Ethics Committee has finally reached the very same conclusion that I offered everybody back in November, and they vindicated me.
But what Plocher called vindication was soured after a memo to Ethics Chairwoman Hannah Kelly was made public. It was from House Director of Administration Lori Hughes, who detailed what she believed was a retaliation by Plocher's office against House Clerk Dana Rademan Miller. Miller had pushed back on Plocher's plan to secure an $800,000 contract with a software company outside the normal bidding process. Hughes wrote, quote, "I believe that the actions of the Speaker's office have warranted my need to inform you of the major concerns I have for not only myself, but for all the employees of the House. In my over 21 years of state government service, I have never witnessed or even been involved in such a hostile work environment that is so horrible that I'm living in fear every day of losing my job." Still, all the other Republicans and 2 Democrats on the Ethics Committee voted to dismiss the complaint. Kelly was visibly frustrated.
There are some days in this building where words do not suffice.
Kelly later released a statement saying in part, "I am appalled by what I witnessed today as some of my colleagues on the House Ethics Committee decided to turn a blind eye to obstruction, intimidation, and retaliation we uncovered during our investigation." Plocher was asked if there will be any punishment for what he described as an attempted coup, and he said he just wants to move forward.